Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Book Talk with Kara. And I'm delighted to introduce you to my friend, Erin Bartels, this week. Erin, can you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I can. I am a novelist. I have four books, fifth one coming out in January, which we'll talk about a bit today. But I'm also a full-time publishing professional. So I work for a publisher as a copywriter. So I do a lot of marketing copy and things like that. And I am married to a pastor. I have a 14-year-old son and a spastic Chihuahua mix. That makes life kind of interesting. And I'm just now thinking I probably shouldn't be recording this right here because she can see out the window and she might be really unhappy if somebody starts walking down the road. So hopefully she doesn't start barking.
And that is real life, right? I have had times where my cat likes to walk across my keyboard, and you're like, that's not what I want in my novel that I'm working on today. So, one thing that people are always really curious about is how do authors get their ideas? And you write what we call book club fiction, or it's not quite literary, but it's really evocative, and people can imagine themselves in the middle of the settings and all of that. But how do you come up with your ideas? Because you've got 5 books, and these aren't simple, easy, it's a suspense, and this is the formula.
Right. Yeah, there really isn't a formula at all, which at times would make it easier, I think, to meet deadlines if there was. But to me, it's for my process of writing, it's just more interesting to me to not really quite know where it's going while I'm writing it. So I'm not a plotter. But I do start obviously with ideas, and my ideas come from a lot of places, like all authors, I think. But a lot of them come to me when I'm doing things that are sort of mindless. So either I'm on a commute that's a really long commute that I've done 100 times or maybe thousands of times. And I'm not really thinking about the way I'm going because I don't have to, or I'm taking a shower and I'm not thinking about what I'm doing because you do it automatically. So those are often the times that ideas come. And a lot of the times they seem like they're out of nowhere, but they attach themselves to other ideas as well. So maybe I hear something on the radio when I'm driving to my office, which is an hour away, and I only go there once a week or a little less than that because I usually work from home. I'll get a little idea from that and I'll kind of write it down in a notebook. I always have a notebook with me. I can't, a lot of people say, well, you shouldn't do that while you're driving. You should, say it into your phone or something. And I can't do that. I have to be physically writing something or it doesn't make any sense. And then, later on, some snippet of a conversation will happen, or I'll have just a weird thought, or you'll watch a TV show or read a news item. And eventually little bits of things kind of attach themselves to each other and they develop this gravitational pull. And then eventually you amass enough stuff that feels like, okay, this can sustain a novel, because an idea that can sustain a short story is really easy. Not saying that writing short stories is easy. It's actually very difficult, but the idea that sustains a novel has to be bigger, right? So it takes a while for me for all those ideas to coalesce.
And I like how you say that, because novels have so many layers. You have to have the external and the internal and the spiritual and the subplot and the romance and all these different things happening. So how did you get that conglomeration of ideas that created a gravitational pull for the book that's coming out? Because everything is just beginning. It sounds like such a fun book, and I just downloaded it, so I need to read it, but I haven't gotten to it yet. But you've got music, and the Soviet Union is falling, and just like all these different things. So how did they all coalesce into one story?
Really good question. Bizarrely enough, the very first idea for that book didn't make it into it, but it was the thing that made me start thinking about it. So I heard a news story about a guy who goes to people's houses who own a lot of land in like Montana and Utah and Idaho and places like that, and asks them if he can dig on their land looking for fossils. And if he finds anything, he splits the money with them when he sells it. And I thought, well, that's fascinating. So I wrote that down, and all of my books happen in Michigan. And in Michigan, the only fossils you ever find, besides sea creatures, we have tons of fossils from sea creatures and corals and things like that. Our state stone is a fossilized coral. called the Petoskey Stone. But the only big things you find are mammoths and mastodons.
Mhm.
And you find those in kind of the area between Detroit and Ann Arbor. And so I thought, well, that'd be interesting to set something in that area and find a fossil. Now, the
Yeah.
idea does make it into the book, but it's not really what the book's about.
Mhm.
It's about music, it's about musicians and things like that. So I don't remember exactly how the music portion got attached to the mastodon portion, but I have a family that is not musical in the sense of like people didn't play a bunch of instruments. We didn't go to concerts and stuff as kids, but my dad is an audiophile, which means he spends most of his fun money on stereo systems, and listening to records was a thing growing up.
Mhm.
Like you sat and you listened, and if dad was sitting and listening, he listened really loud to a lot of different kinds of music. And if he was listening to music after he got home from work, you could be in the room, but you couldn't say anything and you couldn't make any noise and you couldn't bother him, but you could be there listening. And I learned how to appreciate music that way. And my mother is a great singer, and I've always enjoyed singing. My husband, when we were dating in high school and college, was in a few bands, and he played the bass and he wrote songs for me on his acoustic guitar and, all those sorts of things. And so there's all this music in my life.
Mhm.
And as an adult, I learned how to play guitar. My guitar's in the background there if you're watching the video of this. And in fact, when I started writing the book, I realized, well, these are musicians, they would be writing songs. And so I started learning songwriting. And so I've even written songs for the book. I have a secret web page for people who read the book, and there's a QR code where you get to it, and there's a password, and there's music on there from the book.
Oh, that's so
So I
cool.
don't know how all of these things come together, but when you start writing, as you're writing, you find these new layers of meaning and these new
Mhm.
layers of things that you want to say about music or about these two characters, and what are the things that they're really looking for. And so eventually it all kind of comes together, and hopefully it takes, less time than the last book you wrote, but not necessarily. Doesn't seem
Yeah.
to get easier, it just gets different.
Well, and I think that when you care about the writing, when you care about the words, actually each book gets harder
Yeah,
because you push yourself and you're trying something different.
yeah,
And you kind of keep twisting it up and you're like, oh, I already did that. So I've got to try something more and
yep,
something that I haven't done or that I haven't seen. And for me, it feels like I do more research and invest more time in each book rather
yeah,
than it getting easier. And so it's an interesting dichotomy because you would think, oh, now I have the rhythm and I have a pace. And in that sense, you're on book 5, you're probably writing book 6 right now.
yep.
You know your pace. I can write, like, I'm at the point I can write 750 words in 20 minutes if I know where I'm going. And I can just sit down and they're going to probably be pretty good words. But the getting to the words is taking me longer and longer.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic. It is interesting just how different kids are different, even though they're in the same family. Different books are different, even though they're written by the same author. Like the
It's so true.
experience of it is different.
So you're from Michigan and your books are set in Michigan. Why did you decide to set them there instead of going someplace that wasn't as familiar to you?
Well, I think that there's probably a couple reasons. The first one being my first book that was published was tied to a particular place because it was about a particular event.
Mm.
It was involved the Detroit riots in 1967. And so it was built around Detroit, and my whole family's from Detroit. And I just have a deep, deep love for it. And I think that I know that a lot of people are proud of their states. But Michiganders have gotten, over the past decade, I think, really annoying about how happy we are about being in Michigan. And we want everyone else to understand why it's so special. But there's a more practical answer, and it's that if I have to do a bunch of research about a topic, if I don't have to research the place, it's
Yes.
easier and it's going to take less
Yes.
time. So
It's
the
so
book I'm
true.
writing now for 2024 is a dual timeline. And in the past timeline does not take place in Michigan. So it takes place in Europe mostly. And but the present timeline, I'm like, well, if I have to do all of this research about a different time and all these different cities and all these different artists and things, because it's about a painter, um, I need to make something easy on myself. And so not only did I set the present in Michigan, I set it in the city that I live, because then I don't have to worry about, I've lived here for 17 years. I know all about it. So I was trying to make it easier on myself, frankly. But
Yeah.
what's nice is that a lot of readers from Michigan are really excited to read about things that happen in their state and don't just happen in Detroit, because Michigan doesn't get written about as much as a lot of other places. Like everything's written, everything, you're gonna have to cut part of this out. Everything you read is either set in New York, or it's set in the Pacific Northwest, or it's in California, and those are very common places, and so it's an uncommon place.
Well, and I set one of my books on Mackinac Island because we love Mackinac Island as a place
Yes.
to escape to. What's one of your favorite places as a proud Michigan native?
Michigander. It's like the goose and the gander, Michigander.
Oh, there you
Um,
go. So
one
where
of
do
my,
you
I
like to
mean,
go?
anywhere in the UP, but especially Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, which is on the south shore of Lake Superior, and the area around the Porcupine Mountains. Those
Mhm.
are, anywhere along the lakes, the big lakes, is going to be just stunning. Absolutely stunning. Empire Bluffs and Sleeping Bear Dunes. We have some of the most beautiful landscape. And a lot of times you look at it, if you just saw a picture, you would think it was one of the coasts.
Mhm.
It's
So true.
absolutely gorgeous. And I love the UP because it is, there's not as many people. And I'm not a big crowd person. And it's like another world. It is just so beautiful and wild. And I
Mhm.
really love that feeling.
No, that's wonderful. And we went to Sleeping Bear Dunes for the first time a year and a half ago. We actually got to take some of my family up to Mackinac Island because they'd heard us talk about it. They'd read my books up there, and they were out for our son's high school graduation. We went, well, do you guys want to tack on 3 or 4 days and we can go up to Michigan and go up to Mackinac? And on the way, we stopped at the dunes, and I'd never been to the dunes. All the
Mm.
times we'd driven up there, always it just kind of, we're very task oriented. We're like, it is 10 hours to
Take
get
the
to
fastest
Mackinac.
route. Yep.
Exactly. And so we are just zipping up there, and it's a beautiful state from the highway. But then we got along those roads
Oh,
along the edge of the lake, and we were like, oh my goodness, there's a whole nother part to
oh
Michigan
yeah.
we haven't appreciated yet. And so lots of friends from here, that's where they go every summer, is some of the towns like Holland and places like that. But then, you get to the dunes and there's just all these great little escapes that I don't think people think about because we just think big city Detroit.
You think big city Detroit, and then mid Michigan, where I live, is just farms. It's like
Yeah.
corn and and
And
soybeans.
cherries and blueberries.
Right. Well, and when you look at what's fascinating about Michigan, when you look at the west side of the state, that's where, most of our fruit production, things like that, wine, things like that. We're second only to California in diversity of agriculture. And we're
Really?
a much smaller state. It's fascinating the kind of microclimate you get when you're
Yeah.
surrounded by that water, and you get
Yeah.
to do things that other people in the upper Midwest don't get to do.
That's so true. Okay, so Michigan should just hire you. I'm sure everyone's like, okay, we are booking our next vacation to Michigan.
Yeah,
So
I'm a big evangelist for Michigan.
that's awesome. So what's your rhythm like when you're writing? Because you write one book a year, right?
Well, I have been writing one book a year, and that is an unsustainable pace, frankly, because my first book, came out at the beginning of 2019. My second one came out at the end of 2019. Both of them were already written, and one of them took 7 years, and one of them took 6 years.
Oh,
And then my third book was a year. And
oh,
that felt really anxious to me. I was not happy with that pace. I was very anxious that it wouldn't be as layered and interesting and all these things. I really do like that book, but It didn't seem like a way I wanted to live my life.
Mhm.
I mean, I do work full time, and so I have very limited time to write. And I work with books in front of a computer. So it's like you're then writing in front of a computer for however long. So this one that we're talking about today, Everything is Just Beginning, that one took, I think, a couple years to write. And the one I'm working on now has taken a couple years. I've just like started it earlier, but they'll come out every year.
Yeah.
But at this point, I just don't know if I can keep that up. It's really hard. And you think about like the time left you have with your kids in the house.
Mhm.
And I don't necessarily want to always be thinking every day, I should be writing, I should be writing, I should be
Yeah.
writing. So
Yeah.
I'm probably going to slow things down a bit, frankly.
Yeah. Well, and I think that because you write in this book club fiction genre, like I've written 3 books since June. I will have written, but the one I'm working on right now is due in January 1st.
Oh
And
my
it's
word.
really intense, but I know my pacing. And so like yesterday in 3 20-minute sprints with a little bit of break in between, I got 2,400 words done. But I've been writing for a while and I've been thinking about the book a lot and doing a lot of
Right.
research and things like that. But I can't sustain that. I can't sustain this pace for forever. But
No,
I think
because you run out. Your
yeah,
well is dry at some point, and you need
yeah,
to get out from behind your computer and experience life again.
exactly. And I think that's why I read so much. I'm at like 110 books this year, but then I've realized, I was telling my husband this like a month ago. It was like, I actually need, to me, what is creative is going someplace new.
Hmm.
It's getting away. It's, we took the kids to London in August. And I was like, even though I've been there once before, I was like, I just needed the new experiences. I needed the going to museums and walking around in a city that I don't really know. And just having those new experiences, that's what's life-giving to me, and it kind of feeds my creativity, even though I'm writing books set in a fictional town in Virginia or Germany or North Carolina or wherever. It's just having those new experiences, but you have to have time for that and
Yeah.
space for that, and figuring out, because our 2 youngest kids are 14 and 11 and very much aware of the ticking time and what's
Yeah.
left. And so working full time, writing, having kids. Yep, we are singing from the same songbook. So,
Yeah.
so how do how do you find those pockets? You
Yeah.
said you can't like dictate. So how do you
Right.
find those pockets of time?
Well, I'm grateful to have a husband who also does creative things, and so we often work together. In the evening, we'll be out in the cigar room, which a lot of people don't have. I don't understand why more people don't have cigar rooms, but that's where we write. It used to be the sunroom. And so we'll often sit out there and work together. And then times like this, he's in Tennessee for the next few days. And so I will use a lot of my time
Mhm.
to write. When I take vacation time, most of the time it's just to write. But that's the beauty of working for the same company as long as I have, is that you actually get a lot of paid time off.
Yeah.
And I use it to work more, just on other things, which is also probably not healthy. So I do a lot of staycations where you
Yeah.
can get a lot of words down if you're prepared to write. When I was writing my first book, I took a week off of work, and during that week, I wrote 40,000 words,
That's
which
amazing.
is has never happened to me again, unfortunately, but I was really, really ready. And
Yeah.
one day, one of those days was 10,000 words. And
Yeah. I've
so,
I've probably hit 8,000 maybe 3 or 4
yeah,
times. But
it's
then my
hard.
brain is just
Yeah, you have
so
to be like ready
exhausted.
to go, and you have to know where you're
Yeah.
going. And the book I'm writing right now is a very different experience. It's slow going because I keep getting new. Just today, when I was driving home from dropping my son off to school, and then when I was taking a shower, like I said, driving and showers, I had a few new ideas where I'm just like, oh, of course, this is
Yeah.
better. This is great. And but then you have to like slow down and think, okay, how do I make this happen? And so
Yeah.
it's not all ready to go every day. Um, I wish
Yeah.
it was, but it's not.
I love post-it notes where I'll write something down and then I've got a big post-it note, but then I put little post-it notes on to
Mhm.
just kind of be like, okay, don't forget that you've added
Yeah,
this thread and it makes a lot of sense,
yeah,
but now you have to go back and
right,
weave it. And I would stop and go back and weave it in. I'm like, I don't have time for that now. I'll have to get that in the edits.
right.
Got to keep moving forward.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
thank God for NaNoWriMo because I may get 50,000 words this month because I got to. So, well, thank you so much for joining me. This was so much fun. And I think people are going to really enjoy hearing about your books, your process, and the book that's coming out in January. Tell us again, real quickly, what it's about and where people can find it.
Yes, it's called Everything is Just Beginning. It's about two musicians in 1990 who sort of find each other by accident and start something new. And both of their lives have something that's ending, but for their relationship and their art, things are just beginning. And it'll be, anywhere you want to get books. I really encourage people to get a copy from their local independent bookstore if they can.
That's wonderful. All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Kara.